Hi, I'm Jane McCallion.
And I'm Adam Shepherd.
Welcome to the ITPro podcast, your weekly guide to the most important topics in the IT industry.
So, Jane, today is a very exciting day. We have some very exciting news to share from ITPro HQ.
We do. If you enjoy reading the website and listening to our dulcet tones in your ears, then we would like you to know that we are also launching ITPro 2020, which is a magazine that contains both the best of the content that's been online, as well as some exclusive features and opinions and that kind of thing. It's all being headed up by our deputy editor, Dale Walker.
Yes, it'll take the form of a monthly downloadable PDF-based magazine, which you will be able to download, peruse, print off at your leisure.
Yeah, I'm super looking forward to it, actually. I think I've mentioned before on the podcast that I was briefly on PC Pro, shout out to our friends at PC Pro, for a year. And I used to, before that, freelance for magazines as well. So it's quite nice to have, a little touch of the old kind of print magic on us again.
Yeah, there really isn't anything quite like seeing your own words in print. There's something very special about it. And also, a print layout for, features and opinions and whatnot. It's a nice thing to look at. It's very visually engaging.
Speaking of news from the IT industry and indeed ITPro, our first story this week is that OpenReach is offering free full-fibre installation for thousands of homes in the UK.
Yes, this is a very interesting announcement, coming fairly hot on the heels, as it does, after the fairly catastrophic defeat of Labour in the general elections, one of whom's main manifesto pledges was the rollout of free full-fibre broadband.
Indeed.
So it seems like a little bit of a slap in the face in some way.
Who has been cribbing from whom?
Well,
in fairness, so Labour's plan was free broadband for all by 2030 from memory. We will link to the podcast that we actually did on this very subject with our colleague Kumar's Afifi Sabet. This is just to 13,000 new homes on 600 small housing developments, which will get fibre to the premises, which is the fastest way of getting fibre broadband to your house. So it's not quite what Labour or indeed the Tories with their 2025 manifesto promise have put forward. But for those 13,000 premises, it's certainly a step in the right direction.
The scheme is available to any property developers whose sites have more than 20 properties, and that's down from the previous threshold of 30 properties. And the interesting thing about this is that it's really going to give a major boost to the UK's full fibre coverage, because at present the UK has just 8% of premises, and that's both homes and businesses. Just 8% have full fibre coverage, which is really lagging behind some of the kind of global leaders in this space. So countries in Asia, South Korea and Japan notably, have more than 95% coverage full fibre.
Yeah, we're pretty useless compared to the rest of Europe as well. This, to coin a horrible cliche from the tech industry, but it is a bit more of an evolution than a revolution, because this is something that has been going on. It's just that OpenReach has brought down the threshold from 30 homes or more in a development to 20. It is the kind of thing that you would expect in the same way that increasingly houses built during the last century went from having outdoor plumbing to indoor plumbing, if you will take my euphemism. So, yeah, it's good. Don't get me wrong. It's really good, especially if they can get decent rates from broadband providers. But at the same time, it's not revolutionary.
Well, quite. But hopefully it should help give a much needed boost to Britain's broadband infrastructure.
Yes.
So moving on, we have a major deal from Spain's Banco Sabadell. which has signed a €1 billion contract for a decade-long digital transformation deal with IBM. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it centers around a new hybrid cloud infrastructure, which will be rolled out across the bank's estate. But it's being developed by Red Hat, which, as of last year, is now part of the IBM machine. And I believe this is the first big deal that Red Hat has landed since it came under IBM's ownership.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, for anybody, this would be a big deal. 1 billion, even for companies as big as IBM, is no chicken scratch. Admittedly, it's a 10-year project, so I think that sort of shows how massive this is going to be. I think when they talk about digital transformation, they are not joking.
On that point, it should be noted that Banco Sabadell is actually the parent company of TSB, which most of our listeners should remember had a major IT meltdown in 2018. And in fact, it was IBM that was called in to essentially help them sort that out and put out the fires and modernize their infrastructure in the wake of it. So
clearly they made a good impression in doing so. Well, TSB's problem was it not that they effectively tried to transform everything all at the same time?
Yes, as we covered in a previous podcast episode after IBM's report into this came out, which suggested that TSB didn't test the new systems rigorously enough before rolling them out across the entire state. But the thing that's weighing on my mind slightly is that this deal is for 10 years, which is a long time.
I mean, it's a big corporate contract. If you look at it in that frame, then it's really not that kind of an extraordinarily long time. A lot of companies, banks are companies, do run on sort of 5 to 10 year scales. So. And also, it depends what they want to do. You don't know what Banco Sabadell's back end looks like right now. So if they're going to sort of transform everything and look to this, as they're saying, an open hybrid cloud platform, then there might be so much work that needs doing that in order to do it, it takes 10 years. Also, the contract is 10 years. So for all we know, it might be done in 24 months, and then the remaining 8 years is sort of maintenance and support. Yeah.
I mean, yes, that is likely to be what's happening, but the duration just gives me a little bit of pause, because I mean, you think about where IT was 10 years ago. The cloud was barely a thing. Smartphones were certainly nowhere near as ubiquitous as they are now. Remote working was difficult at best. The entire landscape of business IT has changed, dramatically. It's almost unrecognizable. So locking oneself into a contract for that long, and I know that kind of banks, as with all financial institutions, tend to operate on longer timeframes for reasons of risk and various other things. But locking oneself into a 10-year contract.
But everything you've just cited is kind of either consumer or very front end. When it comes to back end stuff, you don't completely refresh your data center on a whim every kind of couple of years, or even if you are using kind of the cloud intensively, you're not just going to skip and hop between different providers, even if that is the theory, for major workloads. You're not going to do that. You're going to be there for a couple of years. So yeah, it sounds completely sane to me.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this particular project develops over the next decade.
Definitely. And finally, we have a sort of poacher turned gamekeeper story a little bit with regards to a serious cryptographic flaw in Windows 10 that was discovered by the NSA.
Yeah, this is a particularly odd one for me because the NSA is notorious for hoarding 0 days and vulnerabilities, particularly for Windows. It's the NSA that is the source of many of the more severe vulnerabilities that Windows has fallen victim to. Things like Bluekeep, things like double pulsar, which notoriously was a kind of major part of the exploits that WannaCry used to spread so quickly and dramatically.
Can we, as a sidebar, just point out how nerdy and lame all the code names for these things are? Just what a bunch of nerds at the NSA.
I know. There's so many. If you look through the full list of the shadow brokers exploits,
which is also lame and nerdy, so hackers are lame and nerdy as well. Yes,
I mean just the IT industry in general and the IT security industry in particular is shockingly enough full of quite a lot of nerds. But if you look through the list of the exploits dumped by the shadow brokers, they've all got names like, you know, Cyber Jedi and
Weeping Angel,
and like, you know, Black Dark and
back on track.
Yeah. After that slight digression.
Yeah, but yes, so the NSA has handed this flaw over to Microsoft. Now, it was very serious. It was in Microsoft's crypto API, and if exploited, it could be used to spoof a code signing certificate, which would let you digitally sign malicious code, make it look as though it was a trusted source, and off you go. So, you know, serious business across Microsoft's, well, the only current OS now. Oh, no, Windows 8. Sorry, Windows 8. But
poor Windows 8.
Poor old Windows 8, I know. But yes, across the biggest one that's still in support anyway, it raises the question. So after being bitten in the buttocks by the shadow brokers dump, has the NSA learnt a lesson and is now working more collaboratively with the IT industry? Or was this so potentially devastating that they felt compelled to disclose to Microsoft that basically the risk outweighed the reward of keeping it to themselves?
I think by the looks of the story, it looks like it's a little bit of both. So the NSA has said that this isn't the first time it's reported a vulnerability to Microsoft. It's reported previous flaws and vulnerabilities, but has refused credit on prior occasions. But I think the severity of this vulnerability in particular is, you know, was notable enough that they felt they had to publicly disclose it, because this, if exploited, this would undermine, you know, everything from public key infrastructure to HTTPS to, as you said, kind of digital signatures for a huge variety of security and cryptography protocols.
So a bit of a kind of, if they have apparently previously disclosed things to Microsoft but not taken credit, is this now then a kind of like, look, we can play nicely, we're being nice and good, look at all the nice good things that we're doing, we're not just trying to break into your computers.
It should be noted that according to Microsoft, they haven't seen it used in any active attacks. It's not been spotted in the wild, but it will be at some point. The vulnerability has now been patched in this week's Patch Tuesday update, in fact. So anyone running Windows 10, as well as Windows Server, should patch and update as soon as is realistically feasible. So for consumer users, that should be immediately. For businesses, that may take longer for a variety of reasons, particularly when it comes to Windows Server. But this should definitely be a priority update because it will end up being used in exploits at some point, probably sooner rather than later.
Yes, it's always the problem that in disclosing that there is a problem, then you disclose how to attack this thing that you've patched and just hope that everybody gets their patches there before the attackers arrive.
Well, quite. It comes back to that old debate of, security through obscurity. Is it better to sit on a kind of potential vulnerability or to alert the company in question privately, or to just publicize it as widely as possible and hope that people update? And speaking of Windows security, after we come back from the break, we are going to be talking about the end of support for one of the most widely beloved versions of Windows Microsoft has ever put out, Windows 7.
We'll see you after the break.
Hello, I'm Ollie Mann, and every Friday on The Week Unwrapped, we cover the stories you might have missed with journalists from theweek.co.uk. It's all the big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. That's The Week Unwrapped with me, Ollie Mann, available now for free from all good podcast apps.
Welcome back. Now, as Adam mentioned before we went on break, we are going to talk about Windows 7 now. So Windows 7 this week ended its support life cycle in a blaze of Viking funerals and security warnings and all that kind of fancy stuff that really not even XP got this level of eulogy and slight hyperbole.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fondness for Windows 7 in particular. I think one of the reasons it was so widely beloved is that it was bookended by two pretty widely unpopular operating systems in the form of Windows Vista and Windows 8, which were not well received. So I think a lot of users were A, glad to see Windows 7 replace Vista, and B, very unwilling to jump from 7 to 8 when the opportunity arose.
Yeah, I mean, Windows 8, as we discussed with Darren Graham-Smith when we spoke about Windows 10, it was perhaps just a little bit too much for people. The modern interface, as it was called, which is now kind of relegated to the start menu on Windows 10, the touch optimization, all that kind of stuff. It was such a break from Windows 7 and really not ready for the hardware at the time in particular. Is there a danger then that the prized place that Windows 7 holds in people's hearts is more to do with rose-tinted spectacles and fear of change than it is to do with how good or otherwise Windows 7 was?
I think that's a large part of it. OS updates in particular are quite a touchy subject for a lot of people, because if your OS changes and suddenly you don't know where any of the stuff is, that can really impede your ability to get stuff done, whether that's, just PC use in your own personal time or being productive at work. So I think a lot of people are very particular about the way their OS operates.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the fact that Windows 7 was, it was nice and modern versus, sort of XP, like you say, some people did eschew Vista. I never personally had much of a problem with it, but, maybe I'm an outlier. But, it did have that stability for business users, especially. It was the kind of thing that their users could get on board with. Yeah, it was user friendly, but it also had good business purpose. It worked well with all your traditional business applications. We see it still in huge organisations like the NHS, for example. Of course, it was moving I guess to a slightly darker area. It was part of the reason why WannaCry was so successful, if you like, within the NHS.
We should point out that for any organisations who are still using Windows 7 and have yet to upgrade to Windows 10, you can still receive security support for Windows 7 by paying for extended support from Microsoft, and that will be available up until 2023. But Windows and Microsoft are discouraging people and organizations from not updating. Windows 7 is now, as of earlier this week, displaying full screen ads on Windows 7, urging people to upgrade to Windows 10, and kind of laying out the dangers of not doing so.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, and I wonder if they didn't learn, well, not just Microsoft, but actually everyone didn't learn a lesson from the end of Windows XP, which was extended and extended and extended and extended, and obviously that has a price for Microsoft as well. And so I think there was possibly a bit more preparedness and, yes, less of an inclination, if you can avoid it, to pay to carry on, you kind of limping along with Windows 7 any longer than you really have to. It's the declared aim of Satya Nadella as well to have everyone, on Windows 10. So, yeah, you want everyone on the latest stuff. You don't really want to be supporting older operating systems for longer than is strictly necessary.
No, because, I mean, aside from anything else, the older an operating system gets, the harder it is to support. The more tools stop working with it, the more it has to rely on outdated code and old versions of things.
Yeah, and business applications as well. They will be working on Windows 10. Windows 10 has been around for 5 years now. They will be optimized and increasingly optimized for Windows 10, and they will stop updating as well. Windows 7 to Windows 10 is not the huge jump that people were being made to ask for Windows 8. And it's a fairly familiar looking operating system. Even if you moved from Windows 95 tomorrow to Windows 10, you wouldn't be completely lost, even though it would look a little bit weird.
Increasingly now, much more so now than when Windows 10 originally launched, they made a lot of changes after the first kind of 6 to 12 months of feedback to bring it much, much closer to the quote-unquote traditional Windows experience that a lot of people were clinging to Windows 7 to retain.
Yeah, and as I'm admittedly a Mac user since childhood, feel free to write in with your complaints. But I am. When I think back to how my childhood computer, an old Performer, ran what would have been Macintosh OS sort of 9 and prior versus what became X and was initially known a bit as Aqua, which is nerdy. But, there's been a kind of steady progression. Apple never really did that big bang that Microsoft tried to do, like I say, with Windows 8 and indeed with Windows 10. You can't force your customers. They will just hold on to what they already have if you don't give them something that they want. And I think if there's anything that we've learnt from this podcast, it's that the words big bang applied to technology are bad.
Exactly.
No big bang migrations, no big bang, kind of UX overhauls, no big bang.
And I think that's actually a really important part of why so many organizations clung on to Windows 7 for so long, is that the kind of stability that Microsoft's older approach to OS updates had in terms of, the initial release and 2 or 3 service packs at regular, well-spaced intervals.
Well, you said the magic words earlier when we were talking about Windows 10. You said Patch Tuesday. Now, that was something that everyone was on board with and that Microsoft said it was going to and kind of allegedly officially has got rid of. But the reality is that actually, as much as they're all kind of incremental updates and stuff, Patch Tuesday still exists in Windows 10. And it's an important thing for their user base, especially a business user base, because you need to know what's going to happen. You can't just have your OS modifying itself on the fly and you not really knowing why, and then sudden things are broken, and that doesn't work for anyone. I think you're right.
So yeah, I think the kind of regular incremental nature of Windows 10's updates put the heebie-jeebies up a lot of IT professionals and IT security professionals, because I mean, especially Windows 10 updates, they have a history of breaking things, and if your business relies on certain applications to get stuff done, to do things like processing orders and, you know, shipping out goods, or even just, you know, making sure that employees get paid on time, you really can't take the chance that an errant update is going to balk compatibility for those things.
No, and even as a consumer, across all my devices, all operating systems, the second that something is released, I don't put it on my device. I wait for everybody else to do it and for it to crash or not crash their devices, and then I follow suit.
But I think Microsoft's recent strategy of staggering or giving businesses the option to stagger the updates and to put them off for a small period until they can ascertain compatibility and back stuff up and all the rest of it. It gives them more of a window to make sure that they can actually roll out updates in a kind of timely and safe manner without having to just not install updates at all for fear of breaking stuff. Well, I think that's all we've got time for this week, unfortunately.
You can find links to all the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website, www.itpro.co.uk. You can also follow us on Twitter, where we are at ITPro, as well as Facebook and LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find your podcast to never miss an episode. Also, if you're enjoying the show so far, please do stop by to rate us on those apps and give us a review. We will be back next week with more news and analysis from the world of IT. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.